Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay and sorry for the recent blip with doing this live. Again, still figuring out all the nooks and crannies of these little technological things. But wanted to say good morning and happy Monday and happy May. There's a lot going on these days, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening um, environmentally, naturally, and then also how this can influence us. And so, it's May, and the flowers starting to blossom, and the sun's lasting longer in the sky, and temperatures are steadily moving upward in a better direction where it's warmer each day. And, this is all the natural progression of what we should expect around this time of year, more or less. And, it's great to observe these things, and we have more of an opportunity to observe these things now that so many of us are actually inclined to being inward. We're forced to being inside, where we can actually slow down with our day-to-day routines and see like what's actually happening outside from the inside. So it really is an interesting experience to have this sense of perspective. And I feel that with COVID having started this whole process the way it has, it's really inviting many of us to look at ourselves, to look at our lives, to look at the circumstances and the situations and the scenarios that we exist with on a day to day basis. And one of the key components that's a constant is the mind. And the mind is present every day from morning till the evening, from dawn till dusk. And it's always there. It's always doing something. It's always looking for something to do. And when we're sitting within this place of observing what the mind is doing, we're either aware that we can see the thoughts coming and going and just have an experience with them and say, oh, there's an interesting thought. Or more often than not, for many people, or at any given time, we get caught up in our thoughts because we forget that we're not the thoughts and thoughts are just passing by, just like clouds in the sky are just passing by. And we can either identify with each cloud and tell a story about it, or we can just have an observation of it until something finally lands and pulls our attention in that direction. And it really doesn't matter what we perceive it as or how we tell the story because it's still doing its thing. The day is still doing itself. It's existing. And having a moment to moment awareness, having a sense of presence really slows down this vacillation of the mind. The mind in general has a tendency of either projecting forward or holding on to the past. When we think ahead, it's great to visualize and envision certain things and sort of tune into this ideal scenario that we have as an intention, which is great. It's great to have a dream, of course. It gives us something to look forward to, something to have um, an aspiration to. And then there's a place in the mind where it gets into more of a troublesome place where we're thinking too much and telling stories about something that hasn't actually happened yet, but we're making believe it has. And more often than not, that's rooted in some sort of trauma of the past or some sort of understanding of anxiety, which really is about a projection into the future of something that could be, would be, and um, it's not necessarily realistic, but we think it is. And so if we think ourselves into it, it can seem that way physiologically. Um, and depression also is the opposite end of that spectrum, where we're holding on to the past of what could have been and should have been and would have been. And we can't change the past, and we can influence the future to some degree based on what we're doing today, what we're doing right now in this moment. And if we're able to really sit within the context of our thoughts and slow down and have an observation that thoughts are happening, feelings are coming up, sitting with each experience as an individual experience in the context of being human, because we're human, so we're living a human experience in this body. When we're able to take a step back and really see the thoughts for what they are, see the emotions for what they are, and know how to navigate them more fluidly, then they have less of a hold on us as we allow them to have, and then we don't necessarily spiral as much out of control um, in those situations. So bringing the concept of what today's discussion is to a more grounded place, discussing change, anxiety, and depression, you know, there's a lot of anxiety going on right now. There's a lot of depression going on right now. There's a lot of change happening right now. Naturally, things are changing, the weather is changing, the climate is changing, the season is changing. And what story we believe, which starts in our mind for the most part, and is influenced obviously from the outside. So we can have our own inherent belief systems. And then when we're watching the media and listening to certain friends or interacting with people or passing by in a supermarket and we hear people talking about certain things, it's just natural for our senses to try to gather information collectively and bring it back towards the center point. And then we start to sort of calculate and analyze and interpret and all these things. This is the programming, this is the computer, this is the system that's taking in that information and deciding what to do with it on some level, consciously and subconsciously. And so when we're out and about, whether watching TV or watching the news or watching Facebook or listening to friends convey information of things they heard or anywhere, we're gathering this information. And when we're more connected to our being, we can filter the information accordingly without allowing it to sort of dissuade us or pull us around. You know, the senses are sort of gathering information, and there's five senses, you know, eyes and ears and nose and mouth and touch. And it's pulling in towards the center where the mind is sort of the executor and deciding what to do next with the information. And if we slow down and we take a moment just to breathe, just to pause, just to wonder, like, is this really true? We'll start to go down this other, we'll call it rabbit hole, like in Alice in Wonderland, and we can navigate from that place and see like where are we going with this information based on asking a simple question: what's true right here, right now for us? It's always about coming back to the present moment so that we don't get caught up in like, oh my God, what if? And what about this? And what about that? And this might happen and that could happen. So many things could happen. We live in a world, a universe of infinite possibilities. And if we can think it, then more than likely it's either happened, going to happen, or has a tendency to happen, or maybe not even happen at all. We just don't know. And as humans, we like to know because it gives us some sense of control. Because when we know something, we have some level of control around it. What we do, how do we act, how do we react, and we can get caught up in the mind. So imagine like being in a box with four walls, and we're just ruminating in these thoughts over and over and over again, trapped in our own mind, and the mind is just kind of spiraling. And depending on who you are and your history and your life story and the circumstances that have influenced you into becoming who you are today, you're going to interpret this information from that standpoint. And you know, I've asked many of my patients about, if you didn't have a history that you could relate to that was your history, how would you perceive the world as you're seeing it today? If you didn't have that component that's dictating in the background of your current day life experience, those precursory stories, how would you perceive the reality of today? How would you experience this present moment without those stories? There might be a different relationship to it. In fact, I know personally there is a different relationship to it when I have a moment to come in and say, huh, I normally would react in this circumstance based on certain history, you know, historical moments and experiences I've had. If I didn't have those experiences to sort of narrow my vision or scope around this, how would I really act today in this situation without the past? So it's to some degree holding on to the past, and in a lot of instances, we use those past experiences to tell us about the future, and it may or may not be true. And sometimes we self sabotage and create that futuristic perception. And we have to really just sit with that understanding of like, if I'm feeling triggered and something's coming up for me, the trigger is the gift. The trigger is the opportunity for me to look at myself, not project or blame or have this guilt victim mentality of like, you make me feel this way. It's the fault of X, Y, and Z circumstances that this is what's happening. It's not. You know, that's a displacement of our own personal power when we think someone has or something has control over us or has the ability to make us feel anything. Feeling starts inside of us. And if there's something already present there, and it's getting touched upon by something external to us, then that's our opportunity for growth. That's our self realization. That's our self esteem. That's our self care. All of that. It really is important to know what is the self at the center of our universe in our individual lives How do you wake up in the morning? When do you wake up in the morning? What time do you wake up in the morning? How do you perceive the day? How do you start the day off with that simple, subtle intention? And then how do you end the day? And throughout the day, can you connect to these little points of where are you within the context of the day? Or do you get lost in the day and life just carries on the way it does? And you're like, oh my God, life just went so far ahead and I got caught up in things and forgot this and that. It's like, why do we allow life to happen that way? And it's amazing because right now, during this COVID situation, we're being forced to slow down, if not even just come to a halt with our reality and see, like, what do I have? What's available to me today? What's really important? Everyone's really being forced to look at what's important right now in this moment and what is secondary. And that secondary um, that secondary option may not be the something that needs to be entertained. It's an expenditure of energy. Like, what are the most important essential things that I need today? Connection with friends. Am I eating? Am I sleeping? Am I doing anything that's for self-care? Or am I going down this rabbit hole of anxiety and depression and sitting there numb on the couch, sleeping all day, gaining weight, or, and that's more into the depressed state, or the anxious state where you're overeating, you're eating too much, you're eating too fast, you're eating so many different things and you're just trying to self nurture, you know, um, which has a tendency to go into addictive patterns, right? Any kind of anything that is outside of ourselves that we put our energy on, that we put our focus on to have some sense of self gratification is some sort of version of addiction where you're looking for that external stimuli to create this sense of self satisfaction, but that comes inside. That starts from inside. Looking outside of us for any sense of like pure fulfillment um, is going to be a place that we go to where we suffer. It's just, there's a natural element to life where there's pain and pleasure, and that's just part of the dichotomy of being human. Like, you're going to have sun and moon, right? You're going to have dark and day, and we're going to have these polar opposites, but in the context of the bigger picture, the universal big picture, um, we have a sense of oneness. They're both happening. So the two things that oppose each other are actually happening in the one context because that's the balance. And anxiety and depression kind of teeter totter from one direction to the other direction. And, like a pendulum, the pendulum swings forward to the future or goes to the past. And that center point, when the pendulum stops, it's the still point. It's the place where presence actually completely exists. And when you're in the present moment, there's no storytelling. It doesn't go to the future or the past. Just like the breath, the inhale and the exhale. The inhale is what's going to happen next because as we keep breathing in, there is the next moment. And when we exhale, we're letting go of some aspect of ourselves. And to some degree, we're surrendering because we don't know if we're going to have another inhale. That's the amazing relationship to life, is that the first thing that we do when we're leaving the mother's womb is we take a deep breath in, and it's only going to end with the exhale. So when we die, we have an exhale. It's the final exhale. There's no more inhale after that. And that's when we know things have concluded. But if we have another inhale that follows that, then that's not the last moment. So that's just the natural progression of life, that there's the inhale and there's the exhale. And that states of anxiety and depression are part of the human experience. But to the degree in which they can cause us to feel debilitated depends on the quality of our minds and the assessment tool, the determination tool, the perspectives that we have, and the things that we know within ourselves to be actually true, which is rooted in what's happening right now. And, slowly parts of the US, at least, not so much outside of the US, we are having a slow release back into the world with a lot of caution, some places more than others. And this is also causing people anxiety and depression because people are worrying about money, people are worrying about their food during these past couple months of being inward bound. There's a lot of accumulation of either anxiety. People can't wait to get out, and nature's like, it's sunny out, come outside. And there's a depression of like, oh wow, my bank account is depleted, and how am I going to start working again? And all these things, like all these things are happening simultaneously. They are all very real, and without getting too caught up ahead in all these things, we can see what is really revealing to me today, and we'll know more or less what we need to do moving forward from here. and we learn how to sort of put that anchor on the kite that's not going to be like waving about, and just sort of have a sense of stability, even though there's a lot of change happening right now. The constant is there's a lot of change. There's always change. The constant is knowing that that's true. And then also just understanding, like, what can I do right now to really gauge my reality in the perspective of the whole picture. And, I work with a lot of people that have anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictive issues, um, all sorts of issues. And in the Ayurvedic context, all of this can be supported properly with the right diet, with the right lifestyle choices, and sleep practices and exercise patterns. And also, we include, the yoga tradition, which includes the asana practice, the breathing practices, the meditation practices. It becomes a truly integrated, holistic approach to self-individualized protocol and management. And finding your own uniqueness, your own stability in all this is really important to know where you are and who you are in any given moment. And once you've connected to that, you can't forget that. And it's a grounding experience. It's a really centralized self-empowerment where you're just sitting in the middle of that eye, the center of that eye of that hurricane. The hurricane is spinning, but the center of that hurricane is the still point, is the stillness. There's nothing happening in that place until something moves to the next direction. And that's sort of like what we consider when we're reading books on meditation and just other spiritual practices, that there's a presence. Everyone talks about presence, but what is it? It's almost, to some degree, inactivity. To some degree, it's what is actually happening now that you're so slowed down to experiencing that there's less of a story. When you're watching the horizon and the sun is setting and the sun is rising, and you're just really enamored by the qualities of the sun. And, incidentally, when the sun is rising and the sun is setting, there are different qualities that are emitted in the atmosphere that you can observe through colors. You can observe through the sensation in the air itself that those polar opposites of the day have a different quality. So when you slow down to it, you can actually feel it. You can see it. You're in that moment, and you're not even having a story about it. You're just present with it. And then the mind does its thing and comes back in and starts to tell a story. And you're like, oh, I have to take a picture of this and send it to so and so. I can't wait to tell so and so. Or I love these moments and I want more of these. Like, that's the mind just doing its thing. And that's okay. You don't have to be enslaved to it. And I'm going to end on this note. So just consider where you're at within yourself. How closely intimate are you with yourself? And how established are you in your own daily practices and knowing how to create a sense of stability, and how to notice when your mind is going into an anxious pattern, when it goes into depression, and change is that thing that sparks that. Change is that experience in life that's just part of the constant of being in a life. And how do you navigate that? This is the tool that's navigating through each day as the waves rise and fall, right? And knowing yourself is really important. Life is going to teach you every day how to know yourself more deeply. And as time progresses, you get to be more intimate with yourself, or you get to choose to keep spinning until you're not spinning, which is okay too. That's your present reality. That's your present reality. Eventually, things change. Nothing lasts forever. It's amazing what people have told me, oh, that'll never change. And I always question saying, is that really true? Because if we live in a universe where things are always in flux, things are always changing, something slower or faster than others, doesn't matter the speed, then how is it possible to say something will never change? You know, the desk that I'm sitting on right now, or sitting at right now, although it's appearingly solid, and it's been here for a while, under a microscope, I will be able to examine the molecular structure of the desk moving around. It's really slow motion. It's a wooden surface and there's a density to it. It's going to be really slow. So the oxidative process is just going to be slow here versus, a fruit that sits on my kitchen counter. And after a couple of days, it starts to degrade because of oxygen. Depending on the structure of any individualized form, that's going to be what's going to be influencing it based on just time. And everything is unique that way. The human body is unique that way. Health is unique that way. So this is all food for thought. And again, this is Dr. Antonio, and I have Still Point Ayurveda practice in Philadelphia. And I would love to work with you. And so if you're suffering or struggling with anxiety, or you're struggling with depression, and you're worried about weight gain and weight loss and just having lots of issues around this time of year in general, or specifically because of COVID, I would be more than happy to work with you. Just directly message me, private message me, and we can figure out how to move forward together so that, if you're coming in with anxiety and depression and all these other issues, that the end goal will be for you to have management of these mental circumstances, physical circumstances, in a more optimized way, which is the design of Ayurveda, which is to include, you know, an integrative approach to optimal well-being so we can curtail disease and or alleviate disease and or prevent disease. So again, my name is Dr. Antonio, and my website is www.stillpointayurveda.com, and I'm going to leave in the comment section the link to my website. And good morning to everybody. Sorry, I'm just kind of focused on the camera at the moment, but it's good to see everyone saying hi, and sending you all lots of love on this amazing Monday morning. Life is amazing, even when, some moments might not seem to be, and that's okay too. It doesn't always have to be perfectly amazing. That's the amazing part of all this. So have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to hearing from you. And I'll be back next week around the same bat time and same bat channel. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you. Have a great day.